Hi everyone, I'm Will Brown and welcome to the WPQuickies series, bite-sized WordPress tips and tricks in 30 minutes or less. Today I'm going to be talking about synchronizing WordPress databases. It's a bit of a technical talk, this one, so please bear with me. And just thanks for taking the time to join me in this Sydney afternoon. So welcome to all of those here in Sydney, local in Australia, for those overseas as well, and for those watching on replay. Jot down your name and where you're from in the comments. It'd be nice to see who's watching. And who have we got on? David from Wollongong, and Rick from Florida in USA again, some regular viewers. Thanks for spending your time with me on my afternoon, your evening or your morning. So thank you very much. Daniel as well. Hi Daniel, how are you going? Hopefully everything's going well with you guys. While you're doing that, while everyone's logging in, make sure you click on the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube and ding that little bell to get my latest videos. And if you're on Facebook as well, just give a big thumbs up, and that'll help a lot in the SEO and stuff, just people being able to find us. Who else have we got online? Kerry from Wollongong too. So I've got a Wollongong party going on. Morris from Sydney, Tipper from Wyong, and Jean in the Central Coast again. Thank you so much, guys, for following these WP Quickies and taking your time out to watch them. I really do enjoy them. I like to keep in touch with the WordPress community. A bit sad last year that the meetups, the in-person meetups, got cancelled. So we are trying to resurrect the big WordPress Sydney meetup. Try and get that one going in the evenings. But these ones I just like doing the little short, sweet, quick little topics. Okay, so let's move on, because this one's got kind of quite technical and there's a lot of me talking. So sit back, grab a cup of tea, maybe a cup of coffee as well, and let's get right into this one. Okay, I'll make that one a little bit big for you. So again, just to reiterate, this topic is a little bit technical. So get ready for a little bit of information overload in this case. So let's tackle the big question right out in front. Big question that everyone wants to know: how do I synchronize my WordPress staging and development database with the live production database? So I see this question posted in forums and groups at least twice, maybe 3 times every week. So it's a common problem, common thing that a lot of people ask, especially if you're just starting out on your WordPress journey, if you're developing websites for clients. It's a simple question, but it's got a rather complicated answer. So there's no easy answer to this one. So I'm going to try and walk you through some of the motions as to why this is a bit complicated and what's really happening under the bonnet with WordPress and databases. Okay, so I said information overload, and here we go. Jump straight into it. So before we can really understand what's going on about this kind of database replication, moving, merging, there's a lot of words that people use and associate with this thing. So I wanted to go through some of these and just to clarify them and to make sure that you know exactly what's going on, because people kind of use them a little bit interchangeably, you know, and don't really understand like the true meaning of what we're talking about. So let's cover these. First one is copy. So a copy is a one-time duplicate, like a snapshot of an existing database. And so thereafter, the copy can contain different data from the original source. So that's what we mean by copy. Now, a clone is also a one-time duplicate snapshot of an existing database. The terminology suggests that the data is exactly the same as the original database. However, just like the copy, after cloning, it may contain different data, so it might remain out of sync. Replication. So replication, this is a process of frequent cloning from an original database to a copy. So the purpose is to create a distributed database system. So that's 1, 2, or more database copies. Now, the frequency in which they get copied is really determined by the systems manager who looks after the databases. And it can range from minutes to hourly, daily, weekly, or just as needed. So replication, that is a one-way process. So we're pushing stuff out here. So it's usually termed master and slave, where you have a single source of truth database, and that's called the master database. And the slave databases, they're the result of the replication process. They're pushed out from this one database, so you've got copies of like the same data in there. Now, you can use this system with WordPress very easily. There's a plugin called HyperDB, and that allows you to set up one database as a master, and then you can create different other slave databases. And the whole idea behind this is for speed. So if you've got a big database, if you've got lots of people querying it, then you can spin up lots of different copies, replicants of that database, and then load balance between the different database servers. So which one's running slow, and you can offload users into one that's got more resources to handle it. So that's what replication is. Okay, let's get down to some more difficult terms here. So asynchronous, you might hear this when you're talking about databases. Asynchronous and synchronous, what do they mean? Well, asynchronous is when data is sent out of sequence between two computers or two databases. This could mean that the data is sent out of order, or sometimes we call that ad hoc. So the receiving computer has to determine how to correctly insert the data into its own system. So it's just receiving all this data asynchronously, could be out of order. So it's the receiving computer's job to bring them all together in a particular order and store them. Synchronous is the opposite. So that's when data is sent in a sequence, step by step, step 1, step 2, step 3. And the receiving computer or receiving database expects that data to be in the correct sequence, the correct order to insert into its own systems. So asynchronous, all over the place. Synchronous, like a bunch of marching ants delivering the data. Okay, synchronization. So data synchronization is a process of establishing consistency among the data from a source to a target data storage, and vice versa. It's continuous, it's harmonious, with the data over time. So the whole idea here in layman's terms, basically, data can be added to a single clone database, and the system will ensure that that data is copied and synchronized through all the databases it manages. So when you're talking about synchronization, we're talking two-way matching. So this is where you'd expect the database in one place. You add stuff and it synchronizes out to all the other databases and vice versa. Some like database number 3, somebody adds something and it brings it all the way down into database 1 and 2. So that's called synchronizing or syncing for short. Merging is a process used by synchronization. And so the database system here must be able to determine which data is the most recent, or sometimes we call that the truth data, in order to overwrite, update older data to support the synchronization. This is pretty difficult. This is where we get into like the challenge when we're talking about like real synchronization. And it can result in conflicts, which means that there's 2 or more data items and the system can't differentiate between which one is the truth, which one should be overwritten or updated. So yeah, that's really difficult, and conflicts do happen and can happen quite often. So another word, transaction. So transaction, this is a single database operation, like a read, a write, a delete, an update, a query, that sort of thing. Transaction management, so that's a system that looks after the database transactions, making sure they're completed and in the correct order. Rollback and roll forward. These are used together, especially with transactions. So you might hear those when people are talking about databases. The rollback is more commonly talked about. So that's used by the transaction management system. That's the system that looks after the transactions for the database. So rollback is used to undo one or more transactions or database operations. Roll forward, pretty much the opposite of rollback. So it's used by the transaction management system to redo or action one or more transactions or database operations. So in the fancier databases, when it's doing something, if it fails to do something, it can roll back to a successful point, try and redo, roll forward all the actions for the it's like a playbook that you can fast forward and rewind and do all the transactions for the database. Tables. A table is a set of grouped elements, group data elements. A database usually has multiple tables, and certainly the WordPress databases do. Columns, so columns are inside tables. So a table column identifies data by name and by type. So for example, first name would be a column name, and you set the type to text. A table usually contains multiple columns. You've got lots of columns for the table, identifying all the different data that you need in that table. Rows, a row is one horizontal entry in a table where data is stored in each column. So for example, you could have first name, last name, date of birth, postcode, or post ID, post type, post title, post content, that sort of stuff. Last one is primary key. So this is a special column within the table. It's a unique identifier. So usually this is a number, but it can be anything unique, like an email address, or sometimes used as a primary key. So the primary key, it's used to be able to uniquely identify a row of data in the table. So those are some pretty technical terms, a little bit of information overload in there, but I think it's important to understand the basic operations of a database before answering the main question that we had today about synchronization. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about more practical scenarios, like a typical scenario. So a typical scenario would be like a WordPress designer or developer or copywriter will find themselves in. So the client has an existing website, and the designer, developer, copywriter, whoever it is, they've been commissioned to do some work on that website, and that means making a copy of the live website and the database as well onto another machine to apply the new updates. So that could be your local machine, that could be a staging or development server, whoever, just somewhere different from the live production website. So the new website is updated, and the database is ready on the other machine. So you've done all your updates, you've installed Elementor, you've installed heaping new plugins, you've written a whole lot of new content for it, you've tweaked things, you've modified things, you've added stuff as well. So you've got new design, you've got a new database with different information, and it's ready on this new machine. Now, here's the problem. The live client has received numerous updates during the project timeline, and now has new data in their live WordPress database that isn't on the copy that you have on your local or development machine. So it's at this point that the designer, the developer, whoever it is, asks the question, how do I synchronize my WordPress staging and development database onto the live production database? How do I synchronize? How do I merge? How do I copy? So all those words that we used are all different words that, that the people are using in these forums to try and describe what they want to do. So files are easy, and you just copy those up to the production system, but how do you handle this, this database update issue? So unfortunately, MySQL or MariaDB, pretty much the same thing, which most WordPress databases use, they don't have this distributed transactional management system. So here's why I went through all those words before, just to give you an idea of how I can describe this problem to you. So let's go into a little bit more detail. So what's the actual problem here? Why is it so difficult to merge, synchronize these databases together? So do you remember the last thing that I mentioned on that slide was primary key? Well, this value, it has to be super unique. It has to be unique for the databases to work properly. That's primary key is like a big thing in database operations. And in this scenario, you've got the two databases. You want them to synchronize together, which means that they must match the data between both copies. And that includes matching the primary key exactly. So here's a snapshot of the WP options table from one of my local websites. We can see here the option_ID fields column. So the one on the far left, that is the primary key. And this one, for example, is just an incremental number. So each time a new row is added, it just increments the number from the previous row. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that carries on just all the way to infinity. The problem here is that the other database, so you can imagine the client's website, the live website, now has new data in their database with their own primary keys. And some of those numbers may be the same key number as the data that we've developed in our new website, which means the two databases are out of sync. They can't be merged because you can't have two same primary keys because they're all meant to be unique. So what has to happen is something needs to determine which is the right one, or are they both right? You know, and that's the place of a transactional management system, which MySQL lacks. It doesn't have one for distributed databases. So really, nobody knows which data to add, which data to update, which data to overwrite, or which data to delete. And that's the main issue as to why it's so difficult synchronizing WordPress databases. So because WordPress in itself writes so much mixed data to the database tables, and specifically tables like WP_posts and WP_options, it makes it almost impossible to synchronize changes between an out of sync databases. So if you've copied your database down to local or staging, and you've left the customer's website live, they're generating more data. They've got primary keys in there, and with the same ID or possible same ID as you've got in your database, and nobody knows which is the right one or which ones to keep and which ones to bring in and merge. So really, really difficult to do. There are database transaction management systems out there for MySQL, but usually the cost is way out of reach for a typical freelancer. These things are usually reserved for big enterprises. We're talking thousands and thousands of dollars, not something a freelancer can typically just, you know, download and install and get up and running. Okay, so why aren't these systems available? Why hasn't somebody written one for WordPress already? Well, actually, some people have. They've tried, they've failed, and they've kind of got a solution in place, maybe not really. So let's just talk about a couple of them. So the WordPress company Delicious Brains, who authored the popular plugin WP Migrate DB Pro. So they tried to create a service years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, called MergeBot to tackle this very problem. The whole idea was it was going to be a service that you could subscribe to, and it would like keep your development and your live databases synchronized between the two. A grand idea, but they failed. Not because they're not very good at developers. They're excellent developers. I know some of the guys personally. But because the problem of synchronizing MySQL databases and primary keys is very technically challenging, as I've tried to outline. So you can actually read about their journey. They've written a post. I'll copy that down here in the comments for you to read later. You can read about their journey and some of the issues that they raise in that blog about how difficult it was and how challenging it was to write that sort of system for MySQL, and with these issues of primary keys and with WordPress writing all this different data into like single tables. Another company called WP Stagecoach, they claim to offer database merging service. Notice I say merging and not synchronization. There's a difference there because you're merging data in. You're not keeping exactly the same primary keys between the two. So merging is very different. So they claim to have a system up and running, but they've got heaps of known incompatibilities between different plugins and different systems and different scenarios. So it's definitely not a service that you could just click and run straight away and it works for everything. There's lots of different caveats for that. Another one is VersionPress, and I'll just copy the link here again. You guys can have a look at these. So VersionPress, they also claim to have a solution based on storing database transactional data in Git. Now, Git's a popular development versioning tool for files. So what they've tried to do is every time that you action something in a database, they're trying to store that transaction, that record, that playbook into somewhere, so that then they can then write that to different databases to write that playbook, roll forward and roll back. However, their plugin is a developer preview, and the documentation clearly states it should not be used in production at all. So definitely, I'll post a link to to that one there. And so there's clearly some major issues there if they're saying not to use it in a production system, which is exactly what you want to do, because that's the main issue that people are having, is they've done all their stuff on their local and their staging, they want to push it up to live and synchronize all that new data. And also the plugin itself, it's not been updated in 2 years, which would kind of suggest to me that development has been abandoned. So that one didn't really work either. Okay, the last one, there's a service from WP Merge, so that's wpmerge.io. It seems to offer a solution. However, their service needs to be installed and activated before you make any changes on the live and in production. So it doesn't work for already out of sync databases. So if you've already made a copy for client onto your staging and your client's website's getting more data, then this one will not work in that instance. So you need to install this service on the production server, the client's production server first, before copying your site over to your new server. And to be honest, the client probably isn't really going to be keen on you installing untested and very resource-heavy services on a live website. So again, this works similar to VersionPress. It tries to store, record all the database transactions. And it does this actually from triggering from the WordPress WP query class. Now, if you're a developer, that's fine. You don't need to know exactly what it is, but it's a function in WordPress that deals with database stuff. So they try and look to see when this is being called, and if it is called, they store what it's been doing in whatever system they're doing. Now, the problem here is that it doesn't work with native PHP SQL calls. So if someone's not using that WP query class, and a lot of plugins just do native updates to the database themselves using PHP, then this system does not record that stuff, which is no good. So 9 out of 10 times you're going to have a plugin that's writing to the database natively. The system's not going to catch that, and therefore it's not going to work. And none of these systems, so VersionPress, Stagecoach, and WP Merge, none of them handle conflict resolution either, which is what happens when you got out of sync data, you got duplicate primary keys. Which one do you need to keep? Don't know. They still haven't solved that problem either. And all of this is why it's so darn difficult to merge and synchronize WordPress database between two different systems. Okay, so that's enough about the complexity of synchronizing databases. I'm getting a sore head. I know you guys are as well. So let's look at some practical solutions for this problem. So solution one really is ideally to ask the client to put a hold on updating anything on their live website. So essentially, when you're starting your process, when you're starting your project, you say to the guys, look, here's what's going to happen. You need to, put a hold on people logging in, or a hold on what you're doing, creating posts, things like that on the website, until I get this thing developed, and then we'll push all the new stuff back over and replace your live website. Now, some clients will be fine with this, but others, it may not be possible for others, because they might have an e-commerce website, or they might have user-generated content, and that's what their business model is. So it may not be possible, the solution, but it certainly is the simplest solution. So it avoids the whole problem of having to replicate, merge, synchronize all the data in two different databases. So that's definitely my first solution, and I've used that on many client sites before. The second one is to limit and record the number of updates in the database. So if a client can't or doesn't want to put a hold on their live website while you spend 6-8 weeks, developing a new website for them, the only real other solution you can do is say to them, well, try to limit the amount of updates. Can you maybe stop posting 3 times a day and maybe just post once a day? And get them to record somewhere in a spreadsheet as to what exactly they're doing with the database, what the WordPress website, what things they're updating. So this is kind of like creating your own transactional record, similar to what the other companies have been trying to do, as to what's being updated on the live website. So you'll need to ask the client what items to add to this list and what they've been doing. and you're going to need to add this content to your development site before you push it up to the live website. Now, this can work well for small business websites. It can also work for e-commerce websites as well, as long as you have a way of isolating the data and exporting it and re-importing it in. So I'm thinking about WooCommerce here. So we're thinking about orders, thinking about customers, and transactions, payment transactions for those. Now, there's a great tool that I've used just recently on a project that this was happening. It's called WPAllImport.com, and it works very well with WooCommerce. It allows you to download the products, the orders, the customers, the payment transactions. And while it doesn't keep the same IDs, what it does do is when you re-import the stuff into your new database on your staging site, your development site, it keeps the link between all the orders. So, for example, if you go into WooCommerce and orders, and you can click through on the transaction, the payment stuff, you can click through on the customer if you're allowing to register, that sort of stuff. So WP All Import, it tries and it does a really good job at keeping all that related information together when you re-import it into your staging or your local site. So different primary keys, essentially different data, but it tries to keep that relationship together so that when the client goes back into the dashboard and they click on old orders or orders that have come into live that you've now replicated onto your staging site, that they can go through and click on all those links and they work. So that's a good solution to use, and I've used that one in the past. The third solution I could think of, and it's really a more technical solution and probably it's not going to apply to most people, is to record and apply database updates like unit tests. Now, if you don't know what unit tests are, basically as a developer, when you're creating something, like when you're developing functions, then you create a test, something you can run that has data against that function to make sure it runs properly. So what we're doing here is, rather than use the WordPress user interface to create a post or to create post types or to create data, we create a little unit and we programmatically update the database, and we save this little unit of information. So the whole idea here is that if you're storing all these updates, then you can then go into the live website and then you can run all these units and it will update that data, the same data that you've already ran on your development site for those. Now, it's a bit technical to do this. It requires a lot of SQL knowledge. It requires a lot of data, a lot of patience, a lot of recording, a lot of methodology, a lot of pain as well, because you can't just go, updating in WordPress in the posts, and it may not apply for absolutely everything. So I'm just thinking, for example, if you had a client website that didn't use a page builder, you're now using a page builder like Beaver or Elementor. When you install that plugin, it writes a whole heap of stuff to the database. So things like that, it's not going to work specifically. But if you're writing a custom theme, if you're a developer, maybe a Genesis developer, and you're doing template development, this might be a solution. So you record all the stuff, you write down all the stuff that you're doing, you manually insert all the data, so that then you can go up to the live website, upload the files, and then just run all those tests, and then it will write all that data to the database, essentially merging or recreating the data that you had on development. Okay, phew. I told you this was a bit technical, so I'm sorry if there's any beginners out there that's kind of going over the top of the head, but I've tried to condense this problem down to what it basically is, showing you some of the problems between database synchronization, why it's such a big issue, some people who have tried and failed, some of the reasons that they failed for those, and just a couple of solutions that you can maybe try and sidetrack this issue with, so you don't get caught up with it. So what's the conclusion? Well, there doesn't really seem to be a magic bullet solution for keeping two WordPress databases completely synchronized between two different environments, unfortunately, not at this time. The best you can do is to halt updates on the production website, your client website, while your project goes ahead, do all your stuff on the other machine, and then push it up and replace the live website. That seems to be the best thing, because that avoids this issue totally. The next best solution is to try and record what you're doing and isolate the data the new data that's on the client website. export it and then re-import it into your new copy and then push that up to live just before launching. And it can be done. I've done it before successfully, so it can be done for that. Yeah, so that's really kind of the two best ways, I think, of approaching this. So if you've got any other solutions that work for you, please let me know in the comments below. And if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments just now, and I'll try and kind of circle my way round to them. I'm not expecting a huge lot of comments because it's a very technical topic that we talked about today. Eric agrees that WP All Import is good. It is really good. It costs a little bit of money, but sometimes you got to pay money for a good solution. So it really does what it says out the box. It's probably my number one tool, certainly for dealing with e-commerce and WooCommerce problems. Okay, guys, no questions. I think I probably stumped you all. Oh, more like question. Eric asks, can you also write a plugin that allows you to export the contents? So you can also write a plugin. Yep, you can. So if you're a developer, this kind of goes back to that third solution. Then you can write some functions that's going to export that data that you know, and then re-import it into the new the website. But it goes to show the complexity of this. When somebody says, well, if you're a developer, so that's basically what it comes down to, because it is so technical. This issue. Okay, guys, thank you so much for bearing with me. It was a technical talk for this one. I tried to dumb it down as much as possible for you guys. Yep. So moving on, next week is we're going to be talking about, going right back to basics next week and talking about how you can submit your WordPress website to the major site engines. So this is really targeting those people who like first-time users. So they're just starting on their WordPress journey. Got a brand new website and want to know how you get that indexed by Google, by Yahoo, and DuckDuckGo as well. So join me just for maybe a quick refresh on how you do that for client websites. But certainly, if you're doing first-time websites, this is going to be a good one for you. Again, topics, send me topics I can talk about for these WP Quickies, so I can fill them up throughout the year. Connect with WPAustralia.org. So that's going to tell you all the meetups that are happening across Australia. They're all starting to kick off again. Some of them are going physical, which is great. I think Perth and Melbourne had a physical meetup last month. So if you're looking to get out of the house again, just keep an eye on the meetup groups across Australia. And join us on Slack as well, and ask any questions you have there. There's heaps of channels for different topics. There's a whole lot of us experts and designers and developers that hang out there, and we're happy to answer your question and point you in the right direction. There's me, happy to connect with you guys on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Twitter as well. And yeah, I'm going to draw a close for today because I have waffled on an awful lot, and it's over half an hour just now. So thanks again for everyone for joining me with this topic, and I shall catch you guys next week. Ciao.